Hello, everyone, and greetings from Baltimore, Maryland, the home of the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. I hope you all had a really restful Labor Day weekend. I know so many of you were teaching over the last few days. My name is Abra Bush, and I serve as the Senior Associate Dean at the Peabody Institute here in Baltimore. I'm delighted that you could join us today for Optimizing the Sound of Your Instrument or Voice over Zoom, the first in our series of fall lunch and learn events focused on the challenges and opportunities of remote instruction for music. The topics for this semester's Lunch and Learns were taken from the topics that each of you, many of you on this call, submitted during the summer series. We're thrilled to be able to offer more of these for you and for all of us at Peabody. So thank you for being a part of our community for these bi-weekly events. We will host 7 of them this semester. And at the end of this session, just like the others, you'll give us, you'll have an opportunity to give us some feedback so that we know what's on your mind as we start to think about topics for the following semester. Before we get started, I'd like to thank several Peabody faculty members and staff members who are joining us today for this event. As always, Adam Scalici from Peabody's production team is in the background monitoring the webinar. His is the grumpy looking cat picture that you'll see up on your screen. Thanks, Adam. Patrick Wallen from the Dean's Office is always here to provide additional support. And Christina Mancior and Jacqueline Scavata from Peabody's Launchpad are here to help me curate your questions. We're hopeful that we can get to as many of them as possible for you today. So thank you to all of you for being a part of this. So for those of you that haven't, please go ahead and hop into the chat and introduce yourselves to both the panelists and the attendees. Be careful that that 2 is set on panelists and attendees so that we can all see where you are coming from and who's here. The presenters, again, today are going to spend about the first half of this session on presentations, and then we'll reserve the remainder of the time for questions from you. Please place those questions into the Q&A. It's challenging for us to monitor both, so if you can keep them all in one spot, we'd appreciate it. Also, as always, the presenters have agreed to permit us to record this webinar, so this session will be posted to the Peabody Keep Teaching website within a few days. Okay, so now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest presenters from today. Their bios are available on our website, but in the meantime, Professor Scott Metcalfe is Director of Recording Arts and Sciences at the Peabody Institute, Program Coordinator for the Sound Concentration of Hopkins Advanced Academic Programs Master of Arts degree in Film and Media, and Associate Director of the Sound Sleep Studio for JHU Medicine. And Ed Tetreault is Managing Director of the Recording Arts and Sciences Department at the Peabody Conservatory. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ed, and I'll be back with you in about half an hour.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So cool to be back here and doing another one of these, and definitely excited to dig into some of today's content. I think we've got some really good information for you. So, you know, the focus of today is to talk about like just getting better sound, you know, kind of making sound more focused and for your voice or your instrument over Zoom. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the techniques that we can use to do that. Now, you know, this whole transition to online learning has really kind of put us in kind of a unique situation where, you know, instead of teaching from, say, the comfort of our studios or, you know, the facilities that we've had, we've been really kind of forced to reshift and you know, teach from our homes and more specifically, teach from spaces that typically weren't meant for these kind of things. And so, you know, I thought it really appropriate today for me to do this webinar from my living room. So, you know, kind of talk about some of these spaces that we have to work from and some of the pros and cons of that. Now, normally in a normal studio, we'd probably have, you know, some thought that's gone into the acoustics of an environment. And, you know, I know our rooms at Peabody, so like our control rooms, our studio, all of those things, those rooms were designed with sound in mind. But what happens when we're forced to work in an environment that has not been optimized for sound. And, how do we go about dealing with that? And also, how much of an impact does that really have? Well, I'll cut to the chase and tell you right now that it actually has a lot of impact. And, one of the things that I think is incredibly important to realize is that, most of the time when we're teaching from home, we're broadcasting out there, we have to pay really close attention to how our surroundings are affecting the sound that we're broadcasting out into the world. And vice versa. We also have to start thinking about, our students and the environments that they're in, and what are some of the things that we can do to, help make that experience better. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was some of the differences that I've experienced since having to, transition to online learning and teaching from spaces that are somewhat less than ideal. So, normally in my what feels like right now is as my other life, where we would do recordings in the halls at schools and at the school and things like that. My approach to a recording session was actually very, very different. Recording, setting up microphones and recording acoustic music. My approach to acoustics was very much that I wanted to kind of balance, the effects of the acoustics of the space with the instrument that I was recording, and basically, kind of optimize my microphone placement to balance those two different aspects. So, balancing the sound of the instrument with the sound of the space and going for something really pleasing sounding. What I've discovered is that approach doesn't work incredibly well with online learning. And the things that I've kind of noticed about this is that whether we're using Zoom or Teams or any other sort of, online, FaceTime and things like that, what I've discovered is that kind of detail doesn't translate really well. And so I feel like with online learning, one of the things that we've had to do is really kind of shift our focus to looking for clarity. And I think that's probably like the key thing for my talk today is what we really have to be after here is clarity, like going for the clearest representation of our voice, our instrument, whatever we're teaching. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we do that. What are some of the things that we can do to increase the clarity of our workspace, wherever we happen to be working from? Now, most of us have to deal with the fact that we're probably going to be working from a small space. And small rooms are really, really difficult to begin with, right? One of the challenges that we run into in small rooms is the fact that if they're reflective at all, if they have any kind of surface within them that's going to reflect sound, the time that it takes for that sound to reflect back is really short. And those short reflections are really, really kind of problematic. And so what we have to really look at when we start to examine our room and our space is how many surfaces in our space are reflective. Now, what's a reflective surface? So that could be anything like my hardwood floor that I have in here. It could be my walls, my painted drywall back there, windows. So like I have behind the curtains there, anything like that is going to be incredibly reflective and add to those reflections in the space. And in a small space, that can be really, really difficult to deal with. So one of the things that I've discovered is that for online teaching is that drying up the room that you're in, basically reducing the amount of sound reflections that we have going on, has been really, really effective at raising the clarity of what I'm broadcasting. So how can we go about doing that? How can we go about, assessing our room and coming up with a solution to make it work? Well, I've got a few suggestions for you. I've got some ideas that I think will work really, really well. The easiest way to think about it is that when we're dealing with a room, what we have to do is just basically change up the ratio of reflective surfaces to absorptive surfaces. Okay, well, what's an absorptive surface? An absorptive surface is any kind of surface that's going to basically be really bad at reflecting sound, right? So an absorptive surface is basically not going to be able to reflect sound back into the room, and that's what we want. That's what we really want within a small space. We want to kind of absorb as much of those reflections as we possibly can. So some absorptive materials that I have in here in this room with me, probably a big one is my carpet that's right below. So I've got kind of a large area rug. So covering up as much of that hardwood floor as I possibly can is going to help to absorb some of the sound. And that's what we really want. My curtains behind me. My curtains are going to be really, really effective at absorbing the sounds. Now, some other things that I have in the room that you can't see right now, I've got a sofa and a chair. That works really well. Anything that has some sort of fabric, right, it will work incredibly well to start to absorb sound. And so, you know, what you really want to do is start examining your room and seeing like, well, what can I do? Where can I put a carpet down? Can I add some sort of curtains in certain spots, right? To start to add more absorptive surfaces. One thing that I think I'd like to talk about a little bit more too is the types of absorption that we have. You know, a carpet is great because a carpet has lots of little threads that kind of stick up, right? And, you know, actually I have to say the shaggier the better, right? So like flat, thin carpet, that's not going to absorb as much as like your 1970s shag carpet, right? I'm not saying you should bring the shag carpet back, but if you want it to sound good, it probably would be really effective. So, you know, something like, I've got my bathroom carpet here. You know, I stole this from the bathroom. Don't tell Patty. But basically what I've got here is kind of, you know, carpet with threads sticking up. That's going to be really good. That's going to be pretty effective at capturing a wider range of frequencies. So something like that could be really good. And, you know, looking for a throw rug or area rug that has something like that, like a higher pile carpet, is going to work incredibly well. Something else you've probably seen is the good old acoustic foam. You guys have all seen this, okay? And this can be fairly effective too. It does a decent job at absorbing things, and it tends to be a little more effective at higher frequencies. Now, I don't know. I don't think this looks great. I feel like you could get a little more creative. I don't know. It always gives me kind of a creepy basement vibe when I see this stuff set up. But you know, it will work. So it is a possibility. But I think you can be a little more creative too with how you can do it. But again, any kind of surface that's kind of porous, soft, that's going to be absorptive and work really, really well. So what I'd also like to show you is some other kind of, you know, basic home methods. You know, do you need to go out and spend $5,000 on professional acoustic treatment? No, you really don't. You can do a lot with just household items that will help deaden the sound a little bit. One technique that I like to use is using a spare microphone stand, because I always have a spare microphone stand around usually. And I like to make like little baffles out of them. And I'll show you guys how I do that. So I've got a microphone stand here. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up into kind of like a T. And just have it set like that. And I'm just going to use that along with a blanket. So I've just got a regular blanket. This can be a really effective way of creating a movable piece of acoustic treatment. Now, I'm fairly certain that most of you probably have much better fashion sense than I do. I would hope so. Usually I'm lucky if my socks match. But find a color that works with your room. But by basically like draping this over my microphone stand and then being able to adjust the height, let's see if I can make this a little better. I probably should have chosen a bigger blanket, but something like this, and we can basically take this and fold this around. And one of the things that I like to do with this is put this off to the side, and I can use this to essentially kind of block any kind of reflections. So in my case, what I have here is I've got my kitchen off to this side, and you know, I can use kind of like a panel like this. And like I said, obviously you can make it prettier than that, but it'll work incredibly well for just blocking things. And you can move it around. So again, anything that has like kind of cloth, that's going to work well at absorbing sounds. You know, you got extra kids in the house, put them in their winter sweaters and have them stand around the room and just tell them to be quiet. That'll work great too. It'll absorb sound. But no, but in all seriousness, any kind of absorptive, you know, treatment or carpet or anything like that is really going to help the clarity. Now, I didn't have a lot of time today to do like a full demonstration of this. So what I've done is I've actually created a video, and I'm going to give you guys the link in the chat, or Christina hopefully will do that for me, which would be great. It's just a very short video kind of demonstrating what I've talked about and doing a comparison between a completely untreated room, or this room actually completely untreated, versus this room with treatment in place. And so please feel free to check that out when you have a minute. And you know, again, what I highly recommend listening for is clarity, because that's really what we're after. We want that detail, you know, and trying to minimize the effects of the acoustic environment that we're in. So I love it. A yarn stash. That would, so guys, get crazy with this. I mean, you know, sure, you know, you can come up with some really cool cool options for optimizing your room. And you know, and also too, I would highly recommend, like, next time you're in, you know, a Zoom call, listen to the effects that the different acoustic environments have on some of the different speakers. You will hear drastic differences. And so you know, it will make an absolutely huge difference. Just to kind of tighten that up, clear it up, and your articulation and everything will just go up and be fantastic. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Scott Metcalfe, who has some fantastic information. I'm actually excited about this myself. I love hearing Scott talk about microphones because he loves them as much as I do. But he'll have some great information. So Scott, over to you.
All right, thanks, Ed, and nice to see you all here today. Hopefully, we can give you some information that'll help out. Really, what Ed was talking about here is really the key to a lot of the success of getting a good sound in a small room. There was a good question about what exactly is a small room, length, width, and height. Really, I think for the vast majority of us, any room in our house is going to be considered a small room. We're talking compared to like a concert hall or a large rehearsal space, where the sound has much more chance to develop, and most importantly, the reflections that hit surfaces and then come back to the microphone have been delayed long enough where they're not going to interfere in a way that's going to be detrimental to the sound that you're picking up. So although you may prefer a sound that's more live when you're rehearsing on your own or when you're listening to somebody else play, microphones don't do as good a job in that type of a setting, and we kind of need to be the brains for those microphones. So let me share some slides with you here that I put together and illustrate a couple things Ed was talking about, and then move on to talking about microphones. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint and drop this into a larger view. Here we go. I think it's coming up on my screen. There we go. So let me get this out of the way. So this is actually a picture. I think it's an awfully nice room, but I did a search online for a Johns Hopkins Homewood campus apartment, and this is one that came up. So I thought, okay, well, this might be something that a student, if they're really lucky, because that's a nice looking place, might be living in. And this picture here shows a room that has some of the normal kind of aesthetic choices: sofa, chair, an area rug, some more of the same over here, some art that looks probably a bit soft, sheer curtains that probably acoustically aren't going to do a heck of a lot, but they might do something. And a setting like this is what I'm illustrating, where this probably sounds pretty good. Like if you had your friend sitting on the sofa listening to you play, it's probably going to sound pretty good. For the microphone, though, it's really going to struggle. And that's exactly what Ed was talking about, finding creative ways to soften up the reflections in here. The early reflections are really going to go a long way to making the sound more focused and making it easier for a teacher to hear the student, and if the teacher is demonstrating, vice versa. I just have some, keep in mind that Ed and I are audio engineers and not interior decorators or graphic designers, but I found some materials here that I could throw up. I added heavier curtains here, and this could be like a divider that you might find in an office or something like that. Just a heavy curtain. The heavier the material, the better in terms of soaking up. If you can see light through it, then sound's going to go through it pretty easily. So something on the heavier side is going to be better. I've had some folks asking me about playing louder instruments and disturbing their roommates or neighbors. This is one case where I could advocate for having a closet full of clothes and not feeling like you have to clean the clothes out of your closet anytime soon, because playing it directly into the closet or singing into the direction of the closet is going to soak up a lot of that energy. So although it's not really what you might think of as soundproofing, it's going to do a lot to attenuate that energy and help cut down some of the reflections that we're talking about in terms of better for the microphone. So let's give this guy, sorry, this thing keeps showing up in front of my screen here, so let me move it off to the side. Let's give this violinist here a cup of coffee, because we all need that near us these days, and their laptop. And next to the laptop, they've got a microphone, probably similar to one that many of you might be using with your setups. This is an Audio-Technica mic. This is a sort of conventional mic that would hook up to an interface to the computer, as opposed to the style that connect via USB, which is what I have in front of me here. This AKG has a USB connection on it. And this looks okay in that I have some treatment around the room, and that's going to soak up some of those reflections. I can see, as a recording person, I'm already seeing the ceiling, thinking that might be a problem. But really, at this point, you got to use your ears, because there's a lot of subjectivity in this. My instinct at looking at this is that that's not going to work as well as getting the microphone a little bit closer. So moving it in closer to the instrument so that we get more of the direct sound of the instrument itself, less of that reflection off the ceiling, and more focused sound. The other part of this you've probably noticed already if you've started doing lessons online is it's one thing to hear the instrument, it's also another thing to hear them speaking. And I've seen setups, for example, where a student has a nice grand piano and they stick the mic under the lid of the piano, and that sounds pretty good, but then you can't hear them speaking. So for the purposes of a Zoom type communication, having a microphone placed where you're getting a decent amount of the instrument, but you're also able to hear the student or whomever talking, is going to obviously be optimal. So putting up this screen here, I don't want to scare you with these numbers for anybody that isn't familiar with seeing frequencies written this way. I'll show you another chart that kind of translates this into more musical ranges. But this is a chart that came from a book that I use in my a classical recording mic techniques class. And it's really useful. The book is almost impossible to get now. It's kind of one of those rare books that you'd have to pay a stupid amount of money to buy it. So I don't mind scanning and sharing this. The link to my slides is going to be made available to you so you can get a closer look at it. But this is basically showing, in this case, the string instruments and the kind of radiation patterns, if you will. So like most instruments, the higher frequencies tend to be more directional off the surface. So the violin is projecting pretty much perpendicular off its surface with the sort of full range of frequencies. You can see the lower number, getting into the lower range of the instrument is more not omnidirectional because the body is blocking some of that, but it's more omnidirectional. Curiously, the even higher frequencies, this is up in like articulation range, consonants, that kind of sound, that tends to spread a little bit from the instrument. So you tend to get a pretty uniform, mid frequencies, high frequencies, low frequencies, if you place a mic kind of right on axis to the instrument. And then from there, just the distance, in some cases, it's a matter of how tall your mic stand is. You can't get too far away, or you wanting to hear them speak. But, the first couple of weeks you play with it a little bit, and then eventually you kind of find a spot that works. Cello is very similar, where you've got this sort of directivity of all the frequencies right on axis to the instrument. You can see another view of it here. Double bass is also going to be similar, tweaking a little bit. Some recording engineers like to put a cello mic a little bit closer to the low strings, so you get a little bit more richness and warmth out of it. Whereas a double bass, you may want to go a little bit more towards the higher strings, so you get a little bit more articulation, but that's really getting kind of tweaky. I don't think you need to get too crazy about that. So here's a slide that just kind of references what those numbers mean. So middle C on the piano is around 261 hertz. So it's really kind of our mid-frequency range, or high mids here, where we might have like female vocals, male vocals kind of hover in this range. Get sort of tenor ranged instruments in here, bass instruments here. Really up in the 1,000 hertz range, you're really kind of getting away from the fundamentals of the instruments and getting more into harmonics and overtone territory, really transitioning to that point as you make it up through this range. It's interesting to note these numbers too, because a lot of people look at microphone specs and they say, oh, I have to have 20,000 to 20,000, 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, otherwise it's not really going to be usable for music. There's some truth to that, but and certainly harmonics and overtones are really important as sort of the fingerprint of a given sound. But if you have a mic that says it ends at 15,000 hertz or 16,000 hertz, or even a little lower than that, it's going to be totally fine. And really anything that you're picking up, unless you're doing organ, anything you're picking up below 60 hertz is primarily going to be noise. It's going to be rumble in the room. It's going to be feet stomping on the ground as you're walking around. It might be bumping a mic stand. There's very little musical content that's going to come from there, even though we see that range on the piano. You're still going to hear these notes. They're just not going to, you're not going to hear the sort of fundamental tone quality of it. Just some other instruments relating here. Again, these slides will be available for download as a PDF if this becomes a useful reference for you. Woodwind Instruments here, same kind of thing. You see a lot of times on television, more rock or whatever it might be, jazz, where they close mic right across from the face. You tend to get a lot of lip noise, a lot of wind noise in that location, so you typically move off axis a little bit. For those of you that don't play woodwinds and haven't had the pleasure of standing at the end of it, I don't recommend it. That is not a good place to mic any woodwind instrument. So really you're not looking to mic the instrument from the sound hole or the opening at the end of the instrument. You're looking to go from the side. So clarinet and oboe, sort of lower but still very much facing the side of the instrument. You want to avoid getting a lot of the real high frequencies that are coming off the end. Same with bassoon. Bassoon can be tricky with key click noises, but just playing with the positioning of the mic and closer or further until you get something that you're happy with, you should be able to come up with something that works. Brass instruments are a lot easier in the respect that they tend to be what you see is what you get. They tend to shoot out pretty straight. So for the most part, they're pretty easy to deal with. The concern that you might run into is distorting the microphone, especially if you're using, say, the new high fidelity setting in Zoom, where it eliminates some of the compression, some of the dynamic compression that's used for, spoken word applications. So the user, the player may have to adjust the volume manually, either on their microphone, on their interface, or on the software itself in order to optimize that. And that can be a little tricky with, it sounds perfect for your trombone, but then it's hard to hear them speaking, so they may have to get closer when they're speaking. French horns and tubas obviously fire in the direction opposite of the listener or in a different direction from the listener. So there you tend to just kind of use your ears and place the microphone in a location where you're hearing a decent blend of the instrument and the room sound that it's producing. And you're probably going to have to get a little bit closer to the instrument than you would think, because of the way a microphone picks up the sound that's bouncing all around it. You want to try to focus as much as possible on the sound that's coming from the instrument. So something like this, where a tuba is bouncing off the wall, if we can get the mic over to the side here and maybe catch a little bit of what's coming out the top, that's probably going to be preferable. Plus you're going to hear the player more clearly there. And same thing with all of this with a singer. Again, I'm not a graphic designer. Thank goodness for clip art and my very creative drawing of a microphone here. Thank you very much. But same thing, we're worried about bouncing around. Anything we can do to focus that energy so the sound is coming primarily from the mouth is going to improve the intelligibility on the other side. Now you notice I focus most of my time talking about mic placement and the sound of the instruments. Frankly, there's so many microphones out there now. I wouldn't say there's one mic that I would use on flute, and there's one mic that I'd use on violin, and there's one mic that I would use on a vocalist. There's a lot of mics that work on a lot of different things. In general, when we're miking up close, I do recommend you using a microphone that we call a large diaphragm. We usually know it's a large diaphragm because we address it from the side. So with this microphone, I'm talking into the side of it, as opposed to a microphone like this that we're talking into the end, or we call an end address. This is better in general from a distance, whereas this kind of mic can be used from a distance, but it's much better at close placement. Both of these mics could go through an interface. So if you're looking to do more recording with it, that might be a more flexible option. The USB microphones, there's some great options. This is an Audio-Technica one. This is a AKG Lyra that I have in front of me. This one also does stereo as well as mono, which is kind of nice. But these are becoming harder to find. I think there's some Lyras still out there, or I'm not even sure how to pronounce that. But a lot of the USB mics are getting harder to find. There's a lot of very simple USB interfaces and conventional mics that you can plug in with a mic cable, USB it into your computer, and use it really the same way you were the USB microphone. So you don't have to go this way, it's convenient, but long-term, this might be a really useful solution as you find other applications when maybe you're playing in an ensemble again and actually recording people together. Oops, going too fast with my mouse here. Let me work my way back. Here's a link that is also available either in the chat or will be made available with the other materials from the presentation. There's a really cool website. Ed mentioned that we both love microphones, so this is a site that we both love called the Mic University, Danish Pro Audio Microphones, DPA. Obviously they're selling their microphones, and their microphones are wonderful. We own a lot of them at the school, and they're one of our top choices with a lot of our classical recording especially. But even though they're illustrating with their microphones, the information on this website about how to mic just about any instrument you can think of is all really great, useful information. So I would encourage you to follow that link and check out search for your instrument that you're concerned about, and get some ideas on where to place it, how to place it, and things to listen for. I think you'll find that to be really helpful. So just a quick conclusion, and then we can transition over to questions. So Ed was talking about this, and I was following up talking about the sound in small rooms can be great for your ears, but microphones don't have a brain, sadly. Not yet, maybe in a few years. But microphones can't discriminate between sounds coming directly from the instrument and those bouncing around. whereas our ears take it all together and kind of mix it together in a pleasant way. You could think about going to an orchestra concert, and if you really want to focus on it, you could listen to just the timpani, or you could listen to just the harp, and then you can sit back and listen to the whole thing, and all you've done is made shifts in your brain. The microphone can't do that. So it's a reason why when we record orchestra, we've got to put a mic on the timpani and a mic on the harp and a mic on the double basses and the woodwinds and et cetera. We need to be the brains for that. So we've got mics in front of the orchestra, but then we're bringing in those close mics and shifting the balance of the orchestra the way we think that the listener should be hearing it. Adding the soft materials, as he said, experiment with microphone positioning based on the sound that you like, and being able to hear the person speaking as well. And this question came up earlier. If you are trying the high fidelity mode in Zoom, which is very convenient, are there better options out there? Yeah, but it works for a lot of people, and it does sound good. I've had good success with it. And it's all built in the same program. You don't need to run anything parallel to it. And however, and this was one of their concerns when we were involved in discussing and sort of advocating for this feature to be added, if you're not using headphones, you're going to be prone to feedback. So you're going to want to make sure you have headphones on. You can see I put headphones on this guy here. Again, very good artistry with my white line running back to the laptop. So that's it. Those are my slides, and I think we can shift over to questions if anyone has any.
Ed and Scott, thanks so much. This is fantastic information. Super helpful, super interesting. I also want to thank both of you for working your way through the Q&A. We've answered a lot of folks' questions already, and we'll continue to try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. There are a number of questions, Scott, specifically around that new high fidelity music mode for Zoom, and I'd love to start there. Could you speak about that and about the process of getting that changed? Because I know you were involved in that. And how do these settings compare to Zoom plus clean feed, for example?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to tackle that. So what we asked Zoom for, and they were incredibly responsive. We were, frankly, kind of surprised. We sent them a letter with colleagues of mine at Yale asking for, we thought a reasonable ask was 192 kilobits per second, which would be similar to what you'd get from, say, Spotify or Apple Music. And we figured that that way they could not have to ratchet down the video quality quite so much and still get something that's going to be fine for most people. For anybody that needs higher quality than that, there's a bunch of tools. Clean Feed is a popular one. The regular mode of Zoom should be pretty comparable to the free version of Clean Feed. If you're paying for the pro version, that's probably going to be a little bit better. So if you don't mind running those two things concurrently, if that's easy for you, that's fine. For the next step up, where say Ed and I are doing critical listening of our recording and mixing classes, we're using a tool called Listen To from Audio Movers that is a subscription based, but then you can scale the quality for what you need. It comes right out of your workstation. One quick follow-up to that, there is a question about the high fidelity mode in Zoom, and I haven't played with it too much since it actually came out. Until a couple days ago, I still had the beta version running. But my understanding is when you engage high fidelity mode, it disables echo cancellation and really just basically opens up the fire hose for the sound to come through as is. That's the reason why you have to be using headphones. Otherwise, it's going to cause feedback. Zoom has some really nice algorithms built in that prevent feedback and optimize the sound for speech and make it great for video conferencing. But their objective initially wasn't to do with music, and they were, as I said, surprisingly responsive and really quickly, within a matter of weeks, propped up this high fidelity setting for us to use. And I am told, last thing, and then I'll pass it back, is when you engage high fidelity mode, it's supposed to then be linked to turn on original sound. So if you turn on original sound, you don't have to go in every time and make sure high fidelity mode is engaged. It should automatically jump into that mode. But again, make sure you got your earphones on or you're likely to run into feedback.
So Scott, there are a couple more questions around this, and if we can just stay on the same topic for just a second, I'll ask just a couple short questions, and maybe we can just quickly move through them. In the regular audio settings, what do you suggest the setting for suppressed background noise to? Auto, low, medium, or high, especially for vocal students?
Again, my understanding is that the high fidelity mode disables all that. I kind of wish they went grayed out to really confirm it visually that those are gone. But what we had discussed in the development was high fidelity mode would override all those settings. It's also good to note that if you're going into meetings, which we all have plenty of, that if you're going to be working with your computer speakers, you may want to turn original sound off. So that then all of those cancellation features and things are re-engaged.
There are a number of questions about headphones specifically for this, whether they need to be wired or whether they can be wireless, and also are they needed for both the teacher and the student? So I'll let you take that.
Yeah, actually, Ed's my go-to with a lot of headphone questions, so I'll ask him. Maybe Ed too, you could talk about potential latency issues with wireless stuff.
Yeah, so this is a big question. My preference for these things is a wired headphone or earbud design. I do know a lot of people that are using Bluetooth headphones for this. The issue with Bluetooth is that it is a wireless connection, and in my experience, fidelity has kind of suffered on a lot of Bluetooth headphones that I've heard. So that is an issue, and particularly I would hear that as being an issue, like specifically with voice or piano or things like that. So my tendency is to stay away from that, and you'll notice I am completely wired up today. But I think there's a lot of options, and I do recommend having headphones or earbuds on both sides. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of the things, when we're dealing with music, we're dealing with sound, we want to get the highest fidelity possible. We want to be able to get the widest range of frequencies that we can. And, one of the things, if you think about it, if you're listening on laptop speakers, think about how big those speakers are. They're really tiny. They're going to really struggle to reproduce a wider frequency range. Headphones and earbuds have the advantage of being able to produce a much wider range of frequencies from a much smaller driver, mainly due to the proximity of near your eardrum. And so, taking advantage of that is really, really important. So definitely I would recommend wired. It's a little tougher. Yes, you're probably not going to be able to wear those same headphones when you go for a run or something like that. But I have separate sets of headphones and earbuds for different applications. So like the in-ears that I'm wearing right now, this is what I typically use for most of my Zoom conferences because they do a great job at isolating. There's no bleed escaping from here. And that's why I'm also able to use a really nice microphone for my pickup. So basically, if I were to use headphones, like even open headphones, right? Open headphones can be problematic depending on where that microphone is placed. A lot of times I will use open headphones for mixing and things like that. And I've run into issues where, I've had students saying, "Hey, Ed, I'm getting an echo," and what it was the bleed from my open headphones going into the microphone. So, I would definitely recommend staying away from that combination. If you're going to use a really nice microphone, try to get some sort of closed ones. And I know for vocalists that's really tough to do. It's so hard. Or you could experiment with using open microphones and having the microphone placement be further back. That could work as well.
Thank you. So I just had Christina put into the chat the Peabody recommendations for students and faculty. I will tell you that we're a little hesitant to specifically recommend, microphones or specific headphones, in part because we don't want to advantage anybody over anybody else, but also in part because this stuff's very tough to get right now. For any of you who are trying to purchase microphones or headsets, they're tough to procure. And so I think we're all a little reticent to give you specific names of things and then have you run out and try to find them and they're not there. So please understand that we're not trying to be evasive on that, but it is a little tough for us. Scott and Ed, because equipment is tough to procure right now, what would you want to look for in terms of headphones or headsets for students or faculty? I mean, are there some specific parameters you'd recommend people look for? And also microphones too. I'll put that in there too, because there are a number of questions here about specific earbuds or specific wired headphones. So what would you suggest people look for as they're trying to make those purchases?
Ed, do you want to talk about the headphones and then I'll talk about the microphones?
Sounds like a plan. So, one of the things that I would look for with headphones, I mean, so if we're talking about headphones, like kind of over the head headphones, again, your first choice is going to be closed or open, right? Yes, they're semi-open, but that just means open to me. So, I would take into consideration what's going to be the most effective for your specific situation, right? Okay, maybe your typical microphone placement is going to be further away, or you're using something less sensitive, like say your laptop speakers. Okay, maybe using open mic headphones would be okay for that. Using closed headphones, just expect that you're just going to have that isolation. It's going to be a little bit of a different experience. Earbuds, my recommendation for that actually is just going to be comfort. What's comfortable to you? What can you, what fits the best? I found like a lot of times the best earbuds that I've had have been ones that come with multiple size, fittings on them that allow them to fit. And probably one of the key things that I would recommend when it comes to earbuds is finding earbuds that seal. Okay. One of the biggest complaints about earbuds is that, they a lot of people say, oh, they don't have bass. There's no low frequency. And a lot of times that is mainly due to getting a good seal in your ear canal. You have to have that completely sealed solid in order to get that full range of frequencies. So those would be the things that I would look for, and keep in mind too that most of the time you get what you pay for. Okay. It's just kind of, there are no, I would say, $20 headphones that are just magically amazing, right? That you're going to get like, huge, studio monitor quality sound out of. But there are some options out there that will work just fine.
Yeah, and headphones are one of the rare pieces of equipment in a recording chain that don't really go bad per se. They may wear out from mishandling the cord, or the foam that goes against your ears may wear out. It's a case also where the more expensive models, you get over maybe $150, $200. A lot of those parts become interchange. You can just pull them out and plug a new one in for the cord, or you can put new foam on it. So that becomes an investment way beyond our Zoom era, hopefully. When we're all back together and you want to listen to music on those headphones, you're going to find those to be great. As far as selecting microphones, just a couple things that I would recommend. One is, as I mentioned earlier, something that's a large diaphragm, we call it, or a side address microphone, is just a little bit more versatile when you want to do something up close and then maybe later you want to use it from a distance. It's much more forgiving when the microphone is placed up close. The small diaphragm you might read as a more accurate microphone, and in some respects that's true, but it kind of gets out of control when it's too close, especially on a voice. You'll hear so much popping and noise from the breath and pee-pops and things that'll be just really unusable. So a side address microphone, we don't have any real specific models that we're suggesting. Depends on budget, depends on what's available. But the kind of things you can look for, I just very quickly brought up I did a couple of searches here. This, by the way, is that Mic University, and this is where you can go in and say you want like the microphone application guide, and then you want microphone tips and tricks. And then when you search down here, you'll find all kinds of different mic placement ideas. Again, showing the DPA mics, but these will apply generically to most large diaphragm and small diaphragm microphones. just to give you one slightly technical, but maybe this will click with you, you can find the frequency response of microphones. I mentioned before that, 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz is kind of the extreme range of human hearing. Unless you've been listening to a lot of loud music, then the top end starts to go down. But you'll notice that these are what I would call generally flat. So it's a little squiggly from the bottom to the top, but generally this response of the microphone from the low bass all the way up to the harmonics and overtones is pretty flat. That's going to be a good choice for music, and especially like classical instruments, etc. This is a favorite microphone of mine, so I don't have a problem with it, but this is the SM57, same as the SM58. A lot of people probably have these. And these are terrific microphones that are meant to be placed really close. They're not meant to be more than like a foot away from the sound source. As soon as you get far away, you're going to lose a lot of the low frequency in the sound. You're going to lose a lot of detail. So this is more of what we might call a contoured response. So you want to avoid something that has that kind of extreme shape to it, and instead look for something that's a little bit more flat, like something that's on any of these graphs here. From there, I think bang for the buck. I think the Audio-Technica mics are really good quality for the price point. They're really good quality, period, but for the price point especially. Shure has some great mics. There's a ton of new brands. I feel like there was a time when I knew every microphone that was in existence, and now there's so many new microphone companies that I can't keep up with it. So if you go by those guidelines, hopefully that'll help. And if you're really stuck and you want to email me, I'll help however I can.
Thanks, Scott. So if you were going to invest in if you were a studio faculty member and you were going to invest in a pair of headphones and in a microphone, do you have a rule of thumb about how much you'd spend on either of those two items? Just sort of a ballpark figure for some decent equipment that's going to hold up a while.
Interested to see if Ed agrees. I would say for both the headphones and headphones probably starting around $100 and $150 you can get some really decent headphones. And for microphones, probably in the 150 to 200 range is where you get into decent quality stuff. And then on both sides, it goes way up.
Ed, does that sound right to you?
That sounds pretty accurate to me.
Okay.
And I do. I kind of stand by what I said before. You get what you pay for. And however, I will say, with headphones, sometimes people are hesitant to spend too much money on them. But like Scott was saying earlier, I mean, to me, it's such a great investment. Spending a little bit more money on some really nice headphones. Not only does it give you a set of really nice headphones, but now you have an opportunity to listen to music at a fidelity that's probably higher than anything else you have available to you. So, that's been a recommendation that I've made to my students for years.
Thanks. There are a number of questions here that have come up around how do you approach working with students via Zoom who perhaps only have an iPhone or a smartphone and have generally limited access to a computer? And a couple of variations around that have come up, or students who are playing into iPhones, iPads, or laptops, relying on the built-in mics and videos. What suggestions might you have for them as well?
It's very difficult, and I don't think that the high fidelity mode in Zoom works on mobile devices. I think if I remember right, that was only on laptops. I may not be 100% right on that, but that's what I'm recalling. And I think Clean Feed was kind of in beta on the Chrome browser, if I remember right, only working in Chrome on mobile devices. The microphone that's in a laptop or a phone is really good for speech. It's been optimized for speech. So the parts of speech that we need to hear, like consonants, are exaggerated to make it easier to understand the person on the other side. It's also going to compress the dynamic range so that louds and soft aren't quite as extreme. Those are two things that don't always complement an instrument or a singing voice. So plus the fact that with some notable exceptions, people don't usually yell on the phone quite as loud as your instrument or your singing voice might be, and they're not really meant to handle that extreme dynamic, and they're going to distort. So this is one case where I don't know, Ed may have other ideas, but I don't know of a solution other than an external, even an inexpensive external USB microphone. You can buy adapters for both the Android and iOS devices that take the USB from the microphone or USB from your interface and go into the phone or into the tablet, and you can get very, very good results that way. But obviously it is an investment then in some kind of microphone to use at the same time.
Yeah, you know, and just to kind of to add to that just a little bit, you know, I think one of the major problems is trying to use a single device for both audio and video. You know, it's incredibly difficult to get a really good video capture and get great sound. You know, I would say 9 times out of 10, the optimal placement for video is not the optimal placement for audio. And so, you know, while your students are probably spending a lot of time trying to make it look really good, that's not going to be the ideal setting for making it sound really good. So, you know, I find that placement's everything. And so, you know, if you're using a phone, you're going to find, like, to get it to sound really good, you're going to have that placed in a completely different spot, and it's not going to look good. So I agree with Scott, like having a separate device to handle each aspect you're going to get so much more mileage out of it.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm going to try to quickly go through as many of the questions that are left as possible. Again, Ed and Scott, thanks for your help in answering so many of these in the chat already. I have a small Midi interface set up to use with Logic. How do I set up my microphone headset so that the students can hear me speaking as well as the keyboard?
Yeah, when you say MIDI interface, if it's an audio interface and MIDI interface, which a lot of them are, then you could have your mic and the sound of your keyboard plugged into that and have that as your source for Zoom. If you're going into Logic, what I would do is set up your mic as though you're recording yourself and have the keyboard, if the keyboard sound is in Logic or the keyboard is feeding Logic, and your microphone is going into Logic, they're going to be able to hear both of those. I think both Ed and I have done that with, like, teaching Pro Tools or something, where our configuration was such that the only reasonable way to get that all to work was to have ourselves going through a track in the workstation.
Okay, what do I need 2 devices to run Zoom and Clean Feed simultaneously?
No, they can run on the same device. I believe you have to run the Chrome browser. Does that sound right, Ed? Am I remembering that right? I think it's the Chrome browser for running Clean Feed, but they can be on the same device.
Okay. I have problems with students playing cello where I can't hear the first few notes that they play. They tell me they're on original sound. Thoughts?
Okay, so one of the things that we argued about with we didn't argue about, we requested from Zoom and we didn't get changed was just the language. So when I'm looking at my screen right now, it says turn on original sound, and I always have to think, does that mean it? Okay, that means it's off. So when that says off, it means it's on, and when it says on, it means it's off. It's very confusing. And we thought we could get them to do something with that, and they didn't. But we thank them for what they did. But make sure that what they see on their screen says turn off original sound. That's what I've run into a few times. Otherwise, I'm not sure what would be causing that.
Okay, thank you. Other than having a strong connection, is there a way to prevent Zoom from speeding up the playback and changing the tempo as the student plays?
So high fidelity mode is supposed to fix that. We weren't sure how baked into their algorithm that was, but we did talk about that, and I haven't experienced it yet. But that was one of the issues that came up. It's a brilliant solution for a video conference, web conference, but obviously it really messes with music. So try that mode and see if that helps.
Okay, I'm going to take 2 more, and then we're going to have to say goodbye, everybody. What type of setup does a student need to use the new Zoom audio settings?
Just update Zoom and go under the Zoom preferences and under audio. There may be, you may want to, there's a bunch of articles that have shown up online about how to use it, because there's, in some cases you don't have all the advanced settings available to you in your settings window, and you have to go to the website settings and say, show me my advanced settings, things like that. More than I could go into right here, but if you do a search about teaching with Zoom in the high fidelity mode, I think you'll find step-by-step instructions.
Okay. The last question I'm going to get to here is, any suggestions for recording tips for students who are doing their first recorded college auditions? Most are using their iPhones. They don't necessarily yet own their own headphones, mics, acoustic baffles, etc.
So that's going to be the same situation where, trying to use a single device to get both audio and video, it's going to be really, really tough to do that. Is it possible? Yes, it is. I've found that in my experience that, say if we're really concerned about like the audio capture or something, I felt like my iPad probably did a little bit of a better job than my iPhone. And actually, I have to say, like the camera, I'm sorry, the microphones on my laptop are actually not bad. So, I think there are possibilities, and I think probably the biggest thing I could do, or the best recommendation that I could make, is experiment, right? Try different things, record something, listen back to it. Does that sound good? No? Okay, let's try something else. Listen back again. Does that sound better? Yes. Could we make it better? Yes. Okay, let's try something else. You have to go through that process. I could tell you, as a professional audio engineer, that's the process I go through. I don't just magically go up and put the microphone there and be like, oh, it never happens that way. So, basically I go put the microphone there, I stomp back up the stairs and I listen. Oh, okay, we got to move it. And so I go back down and I move it again. And that process goes again and again until it's right. And then I hit the record button and we get the magical take. So, but that same process has to apply.
Scott and Ed, I cannot thank you enough for visiting with us again and for giving us even more of just great information, tips and tricks, wonderful expert advice. Thank you so, so much. And thank you also for helping out and answering questions in the Q&A. Really got through most of them. I'm sorry for those of you that we did not get to. I also want to again thank Adam Spellicci, Patrick Wallen, Christina Mancior, and Jacqueline Scavata for your support today, helping me curate questions and keeping things moving.